play some damn chess. Street whore. Slut from China. You suck my dick, bitch. Not her, the next chess opponent. You suck my fucking dick, you goddamn mother son of a bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. Suck my slut. You suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. Slut-eyed slut from China. Okay, let's play some damn chess. Slut-eyed slut from China. Caught your unhappy fucking black ass the fuck back to China and caught that goddamn coronavirus the fuck back with you. And in fact, the whole entire goddamn Chinese government and the goddamn Chinese military. Kill them all and let God sort them the fuck out. Just as long as China never can be a threat to the United States of America or any other fucking country. Long live the USA. Trump rules. At least for now. Okay, start the slutty game, you snot-eyed slut. Come on, you slut. You know, this really fucking pisses me off. I give it a few more fucking seconds. God, fuck it. Come on, you slant-eyed slut. Ah, she's cute. I wish I could touch her head in real life. Oh, this one. Suck my dick, bitch. Suck my dick, bitch. God damn it, I fucked up. Suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. God damn it. Suck my dick, bitch. Suck my dick, bitch. You 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 suck my dick, bitch. I see a dick in your future. Suck my dick, bitch. Suck my motherfucking slut. Suck my dick, bitch. Suck my fucking dick. You suck my dick, bitch. Move! Move! Suck my dick, bitch. Suck my dick, bitch. God damn it. Ooh, she spit. Suck my dick, bitch. You know, this is really starting to fucking piss me off. This is really starting to fucking piss me off. Suck my dick, bitch. You 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 suck my dick, bitch. God fucking damn it. Suck my dick, bitch. You suck my motherfucking dick, bitch. Suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. God fucking damn it. You suck my dick, bitch. God damn it. The goddamn motherfucker trying to Janet has Uzi arms in me. Suck my dick, bitch. Suck my dick, bitch. God damn it. Suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. You suck my motherfucking dick, bitch. Are you up for a game of patty cakes into a stalemate? You suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. Stupid! Suck my dick, bitch. Suck my dick, bitch. Stupid! I fucked his hole! He swallowed defeat out of the jaws of victory. Well, she did. Stupid. She's cute, but, you know, I digress. Yeah?
You going to be cooking tonight?
No.
Well, I want you to be careful. I've got my phone charging.
Okay.
And it's sitting there under right in the microwave area.
Okay.
No.
I might make some tea water.
Well, if you make some tea water, though, you just watch out what you're doing because they don't spill it onto my phone.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
All right.
Not good. Love you.
You too. With Lucy Emily. Submit, you slut. Come on, you whore. You suck my dick, bitch. Suck my slut. You suck my dick, bitch. Suck my dick, bitch. You 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 suck my dick, bitch. Suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. 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 You suck my dick, bitch. Stupid fucker. You can kiss that whore goodbye. Suck my slut. You suck my dick, bitch. Suck my dick, bitch. Suck my dick. You suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. God damn. God damn it. Suck my dick, bitch. You suck my motherfucking... You suck my fucking dick. Suck my dick, bitch. You 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 suck my dick, bitch. God fucking damn it. You suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. You suck my fucking dick. You suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. You suck my fucking dick. Suck my dick, bitch. Suck my fucking dick. You suck my fucking dick. Stupid! You suck my fucking dick. God damn it. Man, I fucked up. Stupid! Suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. God damn it. Suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. Suck my fucking dick. Suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. Spit, 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 spit. I'm thinking to get myself a whore. Spit, 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 spit. God damn it. Lucy spit. You suck my dick, bitch. Suck my slut.
Jesus could not have existed the way the Gospels describe him, and here is the devastating reason why. The Gospels contradict each other in ways that are not small, not symbolic, but foundational and irreconcilable. You have been told your whole life that the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, harmonize like voices in a choir, singing one unified truth about the Son of God. But what if I told you they are more like four separate stories, with conflicting timelines, opposing theological goals, and even radically different depictions of Jesus himself? What if I told you that the very foundation of Christianity, that there is a consistent historical narrative of a man named Jesus, crucified in Jerusalem, resurrected after 3 days, completely falls apart when you lay the Gospels side by side and actually look at them without faith-colored glasses? Most believers never do that, and that is no accident. Because if they did, they would find contradictions so obvious, so undeniable, that it would force them to ask a terrifying question. If the Gospels do not agree on who Jesus was, what he said, when he said it, and even how he died, then how can we trust any of it? And if we cannot trust any of it, how do we know he ever existed at all, at least in the way the church claims? Let us start with the crucifixion timeline, perhaps the most sacred event in all of Christianity. According to the Gospel of Mark, Jesus was crucified at 9 in the morning. But according to John, Jesus was not even condemned until noon. That is not a minor detail. It is a full 3-hour discrepancy at the climax of the story. In one Gospel, Jesus is already hanging on the cross at 9 a.m. In another, he has not even been sentenced yet. This is not poetic difference. This is narrative contradiction. And it gets worse. Who discovered the empty tomb? According to Matthew, it was Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. According to Mark, it was Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome. Luke adds Joanna and even more unnamed women. But John? He says it was only Mary Magdalene. How can all of these be true? How can a story passed down as the literal foundation of faith be so inconsistent about the single greatest miracle of all time, the resurrection? This is not the end of the contradictions. It is the beginning. Look at the genealogy of Jesus. Matthew traces Jesus through David's son Solomon. Luke traces him through David's son Nathan. These are two completely different bloodlines, supposedly of the same man. And this is where it begins to feel like we have been lied to. Because scholars have known about these contradictions for centuries, and instead of warning you, they have built entire theologies to cover up the cracks. They say things like, well, Matthew's genealogy is Joseph's and Luke's is Mary's, but the texts never say that. That is not a solution. That is an excuse, a rationalization. And why would the truth of the Son of God need to be rationalized at all? Should not the truth be clear? Should not the most important story in history make sense? Now let us talk about the birth of Jesus. According to Matthew, Jesus was born during the reign of Herod the Great, who died in 4 before Christ. But Luke says Jesus was born during the first census under Quirinius, which happened in 6 after Christ. That is a 10-year discrepancy, a full decade.
Man, this is boring!
Jesus cannot have been born both before and after the turn of the era. And if we cannot agree on the year he was born, how can we trust anything else about his life? These contradictions are not hidden. They are right there. in the pages people claim to be divinely inspired. They are
shit.
glossed over in sermons, ignored in Sunday school, and dismissed by apologists. But when you look at them honestly, they are devastating. Because they reveal a Jesus who was constructed, not remembered. A Jesus who changes based on the agenda of the writer. Mark's Jesus is a suffering human who cries out in despair. John's Jesus is a divine being in full control, delivering cryptic speeches and embracing death. These are not differences of perspective. They are contradictions of character. How can the same man be both unaware of his destiny and fully omniscient? How can he plead for the cup to pass from him in one story and confidently say it is finished in another? You cannot be both. And yet we are told that all of this fits together. That is not faith.
Man, that's probably some ignorant naming. Man, fuck this goddamn shit. I got some long spit arms, I think, with pit smell.
My friends, and welcome back to the What If Project podcast. My name is Glenn Siepert. I'm your host, and this is episode number 155. And I hope you're sitting down, or at least near a seatbelt, so you can buckle up for the ride that we're about to go on together. Because today we are talking to the one and the only Bart Ehrman about all different sorts of things. No teasers. You're going to have to listen to the episode to find out what kind of grounds we're going to explore together. But this is a good one, so I'm glad that you're here. If this is your first time here, a special welcome to you. I'm so glad that you're here. You might be wondering, what is this place? Who is this guy? What is this podcast? Where am I? What is going on? Really simple. The What If Project explores the question, what if there are ways of thinking about God and faith and spirituality and the Bible and heaven and hell and Jesus and the cross and the church and theologies and doctrines and all the things that are different than the ways in which our traditions have handed us. We call this the lifeboat out in the middle of the questions and doubts that are likely rushing over your mind. So if you're in a place where you're deconstructing, you're rethinking, your faith is shifting, it's evolving, it's changing, this is your lifeboat. This is a place to dry off, to get warm, to ask questions, to feel your doubts, to experience no shame, no judgment, no Bible bashing, nothing like that. You are home, you're amongst friends, you're amongst family,
dick, bitch.
And you are welcome
suck my
just
dick.
as you are.
Suck my dick.
Special music today is from my friend Forrest Clay. If you haven't heard of Forrest, you're missing out. Head over to iTunes, head over to Spotify, search his name, download his music, and you'll be in for a treat. He's got a brand new album coming out soon. We don't have an exact release date yet, but keep going back to your music platforms of choice. Search his name. His songs will pop up. And there's a couple of new songs from the album in this episode, and we're excited to share them with you. So all of that to say, my friends, again, this is episode number 155, and it's my conversation with the one and the only, the GOAT, the greatest of all time, Bart Ehrman. Enjoy.
Suck my dick, bitch.
Constructed these walls and I found a business.
Suck my dick, bitch.
Where the company line was the only way to get paid.
Suck my dick, bitch.
We built a church on certainty that fears everything again.
Suck my dick, bitch. Suck my dick, bitch.
Everybody, welcome back to the podcast. This is the episode you have been waiting for, because today we're talking to the legendary Bart Ehrman to chat about all sorts of exciting things. And so, Bart, my friend, welcome to the podcast. It's an honor to talk to you.
You suck my dick.
I hope I'm not legendary the way, like Moses is.
You're up there. You're almost
Suck
there.
I really do exist.
All right, thank you so much for taking the time to come on here. I'm really looking forward to this.
Suck my dick,
thanks for
bitch.
having me. Yeah, this is great.
You're very welcome.
Suck
So,
my
truth be
fucking
told,
dick.
I have a bazillion questions for you, and I have a whole shelf of Bart Ehrman books that are highlighted, dog-eared, sticky notes, all the things, but I'm going to do my best to keep my questions at least
Suck
somewhat
my
focused
dick,
on
bitch.
your book, Lost Christianity.
You
because
suck
I really want
my
to pick your
dick,
brain
bitch.
about the diversity of early Christianity. But before we get into all of that, for our listeners who maybe aren't as obsessed with your work as I am, talk to us a little bit about who
dick,
you are,
bitch.
what you do, a little bit of your journey.
Right, so I'm
my
a professor
dick.
at UNC Chapel Hill. I teach in the Department of Religious Studies. I've taught here since 1988. I started teaching at Rutgers in 1984, and so I've been teaching my courses, which are mainly on New Testament and early Christianity for.
Hey, did you hear me,
30
bitch?
years now.
Suck my dick, bitch.
So my expertise is on my PhD is actually in New Testament studies, but a lot of my research these days is more on
Suck
second
my
and third century
dick,
Christianity, and so I'm
Suck
my
my
expertise
dick,
spans
bitch.
from Jesus
Suck
up to the Emperor
my dick,
Constantine, basically.
Suck
And I
my
approach all of this from a historical
Suck
point
my
of view,
dick,
not from
bitch.
a religious point of view. So not a devotional point of view, but from more of a historical and literary point of view.
Sure. So, personal question for you. How do you identify today in regards to faith? Because I hate labels, but I hear some people insist that you're an atheist. Some people insist you're agnostic. Your Twitter bio kind of throws us all for a loop and says agnostic atheist. So maybe clear up some of the discrepancy. What are some of your personal thoughts about the idea
Suck
of God?
my dick, bitch.
I started out as a very strong evangelical Christian. I was a fundamentalist. I went to Moody Bible Institute after high school, and I was really in.
As fundamentalist as you can get, right?
Yeah. So, but then, when I went to graduate school and started studying this stuff pretty seriously, I decided the Bible was not inerrant, and so I remained a Christian.
Come on,
for a
you
very
dick
long time.
sucker.
It was about 25 years ago or so. I don't know. When I left Christianity altogether, I consider myself a humanist
dick
in
sucker.
positive terms because I'm a big fan of the human race, parts of it, the potential of it anyway.
Damn dick. You moved,
In terms of the
you
negatives, I
goddamn
consider
dick
myself both
sucker
an
from
atheist and
China.
an agnostic. When I left the faith, I had the view that almost everybody seems to have, which is that those are two degrees of the same thing. Right? You got some people who don't believe in God, but they're too wimpy to say so, so they call themselves agnostic.
Suck my dick, bitch.
And people who are really arrogant who say, "I know there's no God." There ain't. And so that, and now I don't see it that way. I think agnosticism is a statement about what you know about the world, and if somebody were to ask me, do you know that there's not a superior being in charge of this whole thing? I say, no, how would I know? I'm just like everyone else. But if you ask me, do I believe that there's a superior God, like somebody who's involved in this world? I say, no, absolutely not. I don't believe that. Yeah. So I think atheism is about belief, and agnosticism is about knowledge, and I do try to keep those two things distinct.
That makes sense. Was that a gradual move for you? Was it did it happen was it a quick decision for you? Was it something that happened over time?
To leave the faith, you mean?
Yeah, to leave from evangelicalism to where you are now?
No, it was a very long process because as a fundamentalist Christian, I was convinced that the Bible had no mistakes of any kind whatsoever, and I could reconcile anything.
Damn it!
Yeah, if they want to, and so I could do that. I was pretty good at that. But I finally got convinced that there actually, there are mistakes in the Bible. Once I realized that, I moved toward a more liberal form of Christianity, which I still thought the Bible was God speaking to people, and that Christ was still representative of God.
Suck my dick,
it wasn't really until, as I say, 25, it might have been 30 years ago now, 25 years ago, where I said, I just got to a point where I didn't believe that there's a God who's in control of this world. I mean, look around. I mean, really? With all the suffering in this world, it's just unbelievable how much suffering there is. And I just thought, it's nice for me to say that God answers my prayers, like, oh, I got the job, or oh, I got the parking space, Stupid! Someone else just got killed in a car wreck, and let alone the 8 children who just died of starvation, minute after minute,
well,
day after, for many millennia.
That would put my black ass in checkmate.
I just don't believe it anymore. And so
even if I am white.
So your book, Lost Christianities, right off the bat,
come on, grow a brain.
Was a very evangelical school, certainly the more conservative side of theology.
Dad put me in the damn checkmate.
Like it's off limits. It's not acceptable. I was told to stay away from it. But once I began deconstructing, like rethinking my faith, kind of towards the end of my seminary career, I went out, of course, did everything they told me not to do. And I started by buying a whole lot of your books, and your textbooks, which are very expensive, but I found them cheap. I found them used, which is helpful. But as I make my way through your books, what continues to fascinate me is the diversity that seems to have existed within early Christianity, the beliefs, the theology, the different texts, and your work really magnifies that. Because for me, that's like a totally new idea. When I picked up your book and I saw Lost Christianities, plural, I immediately thought to myself, wait a minute, like there's more than one? I thought there's only one. Because I was brought up, probably like you, evangelical, to think that, Orthodox Christianity was handed to Jesus in the manger. He then gave it to the apostles, to the bishops, to the priests, to the pastors, and everybody else is wrong. And so maybe you could kick off the discussion and talk to us about like the glaring problems with thinking about history in that context, and maybe a little bit about the diversity that existed back when this all began.
Yeah. So no, it's I know that's definitely what I thought too. And in fact, it wasn't just that there was only one. There was an Orthodox Christianity. The Orthodox Christianity was my Christianity.
Right.
And so, like, if you were a Roman Catholic, sorry, you're not a Christian.
Don't mess with my Christianity, right?
Mormons, oh my God, no, you're not Christian. What are you thinking? And so like, so it's, and I've known people who've said, you cannot be saved unless you're baptized in my church, not my denomination, my church.
Yes, right.
Whoa, okay.
My building right here.
So the reality is that Christianity today is remarkably diverse. You get Roman Catholics and Greek Orthodox and Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Presbyterians, Methodists. You get all this, and they believe very different things, and they have very different practices.
Motherfucking
part of the point of this book, Lost Christianities, is that the wide diversity today pales in comparison with what it was in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, before we had creeds, or before you had like an organization of the church that was where you had leaders who were making sure everything was going the same way, and and even when they had the leaders making sure they were going the same way, they didn't go the same way, but at least they brought a lot of diversity under control. And so the book is about how you have these different groups of early Christians, all of whom thought that they were true followers of Jesus, who thought that they had the truth, who had writings by apostles that showed they had the truth, and they were all at odds with each other. People Christian, people calling themselves Christian, who said all sorts of things that today most Christians would say that ain't Christian. But we have people saying that there were two gods, like literally the Old Testament God was different from the New Testament God, not just kind of different, but no, really a different God. That the New Testament God was to save you from the Old Testament God. Or people who said that there were 36 gods, or 365 gods. Or people who would say Christ was he was God on earth. So since he was God, he wasn't really human. Or no, he was a human, and he wasn't really God. Or people like just almost any doctrine you can think of, people had different views of, often contradictory views, and they all claim to be followers of Jesus. And so you say, well, why didn't they just read the New Testament and figure it out? There wasn't a New
black and white.
The New Testament emerged out of these conflicts. And so that's what my book is about, is how the New Testament emerged out of these conflicts so that people could say, yeah, this is what it means to be Christian.
So if there's all these different branches, all these different camps in Christianity, how did the Orthodox camp become the strongest one? Because even like for myself, I mean, when I started to start exploring things, I got some messages like in my
it's time that Janet has Uzi arms
from concerned professors and fellow students that you're straying from Orthodox Christianity was the big word that was thrown at me. So how did that become so strong? And then all the other ones got pushed aside.
Suck my dick.
Yeah, well, it's a long story, and it's a complicated story. But the deal is let me put it so the view that you outlined that Jesus got this in the cradle and passed it on to his disciples and passed it down to the leaders in the churches. That view has been prominent for a very, very long time. It was most effectively set forth by the father of church history, Eusebius, in the early 4th century, who wrote a 10-volume book called The History of the Church, or sometimes called The Ecclesiastical History, where he explained look, Christianity's always been one thing. Jesus held it, the apostles held it, the leaders of the churches held it. Every now and then, some person would come along and mess it up. They'd be arrogant, or they'd be sinful, or they'd be inspired by the devil. They'd come up with some crazy idea, and you'd get a bunch of followers, and they'd say they were the original form. But in fact, they were always an offshoot. They were a minor offshoot. And so Orthodoxy was understood always to be, by Eusebius, to be primary, first, and it was always the majority view. So that when Eusebius talks about these various heretical groups, the heretics are always secondary and corrupters of the truth. Secondary corrupters of the truth. And so the idea is
look at her spit arms.
All the way back. Then you get these offshoots every now and then. They're pestiferous and sometimes they're pain in the neck, but they're not really Christian. And so Eusebius wrote that, and after that, just about everybody agreed. Yeah, that's how it happened. And so it was that way until the early 20th century, when scholars started realizing that, in fact, every time you discover a new document from early Christianity,
if it wasn't for my goddamn erectile dysfunction,
it has views that are not what you find in Orthodox Christianity. And it isn't just one or two. It's every time you find one of these documents, it's something else. Well, why aren't you finding things that are and so they came to the view that, in fact, in different parts of the Roman Empire, where you had Christianity, in different parts, you had different kinds of Christianity in the 2nd and 3rd century. And so now scholars, of course, trace it back to the 1st century, the diversity, to the time of the New Testament.
Suck
and so
my
that's the view
slut.
now, is that you have all these things. And so your question, sorry about that, that's the background.
Right, sure. It needs background, it's a big question.
So the question is, how did Orthodoxy succeed?
Yeah.
Why this one? So the person, if people listening to this are interested, the book that really made the big difference was written in 1934 by a guy named Walter Bauer, Bauer, and it's called Orthodoxy and Heresy in Earliest Christianity. And he showed this. He showed that in Antioch, there was a different kind of Christianity than in Egypt, as far back as you can trace it. Asia Minor had different kinds of Christianity. Rome had different, and he showed this. And he argued that the form of Christianity that ended up succeeding in establishing itself as orthodox, meaning that it had the right view, orthodoxy literally means the right view, he argued that the group that did that had the right view was the group located in Rome. Rome was the largest church in the empire. It was the largest city in the empire. It also had the largest church in the empire. They had more money than any other church. They had administrative know-how that had trickled down from the administration to Rome. And they began asserting their influence already in the 1st century. And they used their money and their know-how and their influence to spread their form of Christianity, to make sure the right bishop was elected, to make sure that the bishop had the right views. And so it's kind of like, when you're choosing justices for the Supreme Court, right? You choose the one who's got your views, because that's the right view. And then you do that enough, and pretty soon you got the Supreme Court.
Right, pack it.
Pack it. Yep. So they pack the church.
Talk to us about where does the term Gnostic fit into all of that? How big was that in the arena that we're talking about? Because as I've been reading, I've been reading your stuff, Elaine Pagels, Karen King, David Brackey, everybody seems to talk about the Gnostics and Gnosticism in a different way. Some people seem to say it was a big camp, and underneath were different branches. Other people say it was a small branch amongst other smaller branches. I think it's maybe Karen King who says just get rid of the term Gnostic altogether. Somebody's saying that. So maybe help us have a little bit of clarity around where that discussion fits in.
Yeah, right. No, it's a complicated business.
Yeah.
So the term Gnostic literally means somebody who knows. So it comes from the same word agnostic comes from, and agnostic doesn't know, and the Gnostic does know.
Take that poem.
And so there were a group of religions that emphasized the importance of secret knowledge for salvation. Some of these groups are not even Christian groups. Jesus doesn't figure into them, but a lot of them, the ones we know about, most of them are Christian, where Christ is the one who reveals this secret knowledge. And the secret knowledge in most of these systems tends to be knowledge that can help you understand yourself. As one church father put it, it's knowledge about who you are, where you came from, how you got here, and how you can return. And so the idea is that some of us have a spark of divinity within us, and it's trapped here in this world of matter. And the goal of existence is to allow the spark within us to escape our bodily entrapment. And a person can do that when they figure out that they really are a spark within, how they got into the side of them and how they can get out of here. Christ is the one who reveals the knowledge. These Gnostic groups, in order to explain how it happened, come up with a large set of myths that are describing how the world came into, how the divine realm came into existence. How originally there's like one divine being, but it has emanations that come off of them, and then they become their own divine beings, and you have a bunch of divine beings, and this world is a catastrophe because it's created by an evil divine being, and not by the God of, not the good God of the Old Testament. The Old Testament is actually an evil divinity or an ignorant divinity. And so all these myths, the different groups, these different Gnostic groups have different myths, and they have different numbers of gods, and they have different understandings of things. And so that's the debate you're referring to, is that you've got this wide range of things. And so Gnosticism today tends to get used as this umbrella term for a lot of these groups, but some scholars think the umbrella is too big to do any good. I mean, a big umbrella is nice, but if it's a city block, you can't hold it up. Right. So it's not going to do you any good. And so get rid of the umbrella. And so and other scholars say, no, what we need to do is we're going to pick like one of these groups that is really like hardcore, exactly what I'm talking about. That's the group we'll call Gnostic, and we'll call these other groups other things. So there's a lot of debates about that. But there's not much debate about the fact that you have these groups that emphasize the importance of knowledge for salvation, and that they involve these mythologies.
Now, when you talk about how they believe there was the spark,
do you hear me
suck my there was a spark inside of some people. Did they believe that like everybody had that spark, and that everybody had forgotten it, and the people who received the knowledge would be the ones who awakened, or was it only some people had that divine spark?
So different Gnostic groups had different views about this, as with most things.
Shocker.
Yeah, that's a shock. Yeah. One of the more important Christian Gnostic groups thought that there are three kinds of human beings. God damn it! There are some human beings who are just pure animal. There's nothing inside. Like my next door neighbor.
we all have.
There ain't anything there. There are other people who don't have a spark inside, but they have faith and they do good works, and when they die, they will be given some modicum of a good afterlife. But there are other people who have the spark within. And those who have the spark within are the Gnostics, the one who have the capability of knowing. And so being able to learn the truth isn't just a matter of smarts. It's really kind of like a predestination idea. You've got the spirit and you don't. You've got the spark and you don't.
I'm getting my ass
those
fucked.
People are the ones who can come to the truth. And that's why these are secret teachings, because the teachings are for those who are capable of understanding them. And so if you object to these teachings, it's because you don't understand that, which means you don't.
This is boring!
Which means there's no way to argue with these people. Because if you disagree with them, you're not Gnostic. You don't know.
So then those people were not able to obtain salvation then?
Not ultimate salvation, but they... people believe in the rapture called the 7-year tribulation. There's nothing about a 7-year tribulation in the book of Revelation. There's nothing about a rapture, nothing about Jesus coming back to take people out of the world, to take his followers out of the world. He might be talking about people floating up in the sky.
Yeah.
but they're floating up the sky not to be removed at a rapture. They're welcoming Jesus down as the King of the earth.
Okay.
And as King of the earth, he's coming to destroy.
Stupid!
And that's
that was stupid.
As Christ destroys his enemies, and only the righteous are left, and they rule the earth. It's like if you're told that Puff the Magic Dragon is about marijuana, then that's all you hear.
You can't unsee it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
You can't get it out of your head. And but nobody reads the book of Revelation to come away with a rapture in chapter 4. They usually, unless they were told that's what it is.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're sitting down with repeat guest, one of my favorite people, Dr. Bart Ehrman. And so Bart, welcome back to the show. It's always a pleasure to speak with you.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me again. I've always enjoyed it.
Absolutely. So let's cut to it. You have a new book that at the time that this releases will be out for the world to consume. The book is called Armageddon, What the Bible Really Says About the End. And so I wanted to open up the conversation by reading a quote for our listeners, if that's okay with you. And then we'll kind of release you to take us into the wild a little bit. But the quote comes on page 110, so a little bit deeper into the book. And you say the majority of people who read the book of Revelation never ask about its historical context and literary genre, even though they know at least implicitly that these things radically affect the text's meaning. When it comes to this book in particular, that is a terrible mistake. Now, obviously genre and context are important for any ancient text, but maybe talk to us a little bit about why that is all the more true for the book of Revelation, and then talk to us about the genre, the background, context of this particular book. What is going on in this book? We've all heard so many things, but solve the mystery for us, Bart.
Well, just to explain for people who aren't sort of on top of genre studies, most human beings. So it can be expressed. The basic principle can be expressed pretty simply, and I might actually use this example in my book. If you're reading something about a scientific experiment in New York City that's gone wrong, and that a bacterium has gotten out of the lab and it's infected the water supply of New York City, and it's going to be illegal. If you're reading this in a science fiction novel, you pretty much know where it's going to go because you know how science fiction novels work. If you read it on the front page of the New York Times, you know where you're going to go.
Right.
You're going to get out of it.
Now, fuck up and move that whore right here.
What kind of writing it is?
Yeah.
It's that way with books. When you're reading a novel,
okay,
you're not reading you're not reading an op-ed. When you're reading an op-ed, you're not reading a limerick poem. And so whatever kind of writing it is brings its expectation with it. And the problem is that we're used to a lot of genres. So we know how to read a short story. We know how to read a novel. We know how to read. We know how to read the front page of the New York Times. We know how to read things, and just subconsciously, we don't even think about it. We don't think, oh, now the genre of this is, and then you just because people don't know the genre of the Book of Revelation because we don't have writings like that anymore. Yeah. And when you read if you read Revelation, like I used to do, I'm sure you used to do, when you're an evangelical Christian, you read it, say, whoa, this is like so far out there. This is unlike anything that's ever been written. For one thing, that must mean it's inspired by God. Because how could anybody possibly come up with it? Right. And the other thing is, since it stands on its own, you don't have any way of really kind of figuring it out until somebody tells you. Because like if you read 20 novels, you have a pretty good idea about how to read a novel. But if you've never read anything like this, you have no idea what is this thing. And then somebody tells you, and you say, oh yeah, well that's what it is. So the thing is, if you read 20 apocalypses, the way you read 20 novels, then you kind of get the hang of it. And so the deal is that the book of Revelation is not the only book like this from the ancient Jewish and Christian worlds. There are a number of documents that were written at the time.
Stupid!
They have certain characteristics, just like a limerick poem has certain characteristics. And if you understand the characteristics, then you understand what the author's trying to do, rather than coming up with something because you have no idea and somebody's told you what it means. And most of the time, if you're in the kind of circle, I was in fundamentalist circles, the authors who are telling you what this means also don't know. There are these other apocalypses out there. They don't know the genre. And so part of my point of my book is to say, okay, let's try to understand what this would mean in its own context, because this author was trying to communicate something to his own readers 2,000 years ago. And he's not planning on writing for 21st century America. He's actually writing for people living in what's now Turkey, Western Turkey, Christians in churches in Western Turkey at the end of the first century. And so you have to understand what the genre is and what his own historical context is, or you're just going to be taking the thing out of context.
Sure. So is there any way, can we like put ourselves in the place of these original readers, and can we draw some conclusions about what they might have been understanding when they were reading this? Like, did they get this? Did they understand what they were reading, or were they also kind of maybe like, this is way out there? Well, dragons and all these different things, 7 heads.
Well, unfortunately, in the Christian schools at the time, they didn't assign them reading reports, book reports on this one. So
I was beating his black ass.
Book reports to say what they made of it. What we do
kind of fucking bad.
We have a lot of other books like it that we do have readers' reports on, and we have later readers' reports on this book that help us understand how ancient people took it, and there. If you know how this kind of literature works, if you just have a basic idea about how this kind of literature works, there are plenty of clues within the text itself that unpack its meaning that you'll just miss otherwise. But if you're kind of used to looking for this kind of thing,
stupid, because that was
pretty clear that this author is not referring to events that are going to be transpiring in the 21st century.
So he's speaking about what would have been modern day events for them going on in their lifetime, not so much about the future.
Yeah. And this isn't a radical view. I mean, this is a view that historical scholars have had for a very long time. And even, this is just, so biblical scholars study Revelation, and there are a lot of them. They agree. This is John writing for his audience, and he tells you what his audience is. He tells you who he's writing for. He's writing for these Christians in these 7 churches in Western Asia Minor. And he's trying to communicate something to them.
Yeah. All right. So I was reading through your book, and I have so many questions. There are tons of rabbit holes that we can find down. But one of the topics I really want to drill into a little bit is the topic of rapture, because a lot of our listeners come from the evangelical world, so they're kind of rethinking a lot of the things they were handed. And like myself, many of them have told me that they were terrified of the rapture growing up, but I wasn't really afraid of it because I thought I was going to be left behind.
I took his queen and her whole set.
That everybody else who I loved was going to be left behind.
Are you butthurt?
And one of the things I love about your book is that you spend a considerable amount of time kind of talking about this topic and really diffusing some of the misunderstandings around it. So I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about how this theology, or this idea that Jesus is going to return to take his faithful people away while the rest of the world burns, how that stands up, or maybe doesn't stand up, I should say, against the larger context and backdrop of Revelation. Where do people typically find the rapture in Revelation, and then do those findings have even a shred of credibility given the background and context that you shared? And I should say too, I know there are verses outside of Revelation that are referred to as well. I'm going to ask you about those next, but for now, within Revelation, how does the rapture stand up in the midst of all that?
Well, it doesn't stand up very well. The word rapture doesn't occur in the book of Revelation. Revelation is about the calamity that descend against Earth at the end of time. And it'll be disaster after disaster that's going to hit the planet. And there's no passage that mentions Jesus coming back to take people out of the world. I assume that almost all your readers know that the rapture
is this doctrine that Jesus comes back before all of this nastiness hits the planet, gets them out, and so the people who are left behind are the ones who have to experience what people believe in rapture called the 7-year tribulation. There's nothing about a 7-year tribulation in the book of Revelation. There's nothing about a rapture, nothing about Jesus coming back to take people out of the world, to take his followers out of the world. Those who are out of the world in Revelation that are up in heaven are Christians who are martyrs, who do show up, but there's no rapture. And so, when you're reading a book and you believe in the rapture, and the rapture's not in the book, then you have to try and find someplace where you're like, it's got to be there somewhere. And so I think what typically prophecy writers say is that in chapter 4, what happened? The first part of Revelation, the first 3 chapters, are John having a vision of Christ. In chapter 1, and
I beat the fuck out of his black. Man, I beat the fuck out of his black
the 7 churches that he's writing to. And Christ dictates
these
letters, which will be
white.
important in a minute. He dictates these letters to the 7 churches, and he says, some of them are doing things fine, but need some improvement. Things up, and all of them have problems. And he tells each one of them, "You better shape up, because if you don't, I'm going to take away your lampstand." The lampstand is like Christ's presence in the church, and so he's going to condemn them. And then in chapter 4, you start getting into what people are looking for, which is the real action. And the way real action begins is John sees a door up in heaven, or a window up in heaven, and a voice comes down for him to go up. And he goes up and he has a vision of the throne room of God. And that's where he starts seeing what's going to start happening on the earth. And so I think people who are trying desperately to find something like a rapture, that's what they look at, is John going up into heaven, and that's an image of the rapture.
Yeah. So it's funny because growing up, I was one of those people that had the end times charted out on my wall. I drew it all out and I figured all the years out and things like that, and it was so clear to me at that point that there is this 7-year tribulation, there is all these things that are going to happen. But do people typically come to those kinds of conclusions because they're reading the text apart from that genre that you spoke of before? When you just read it at a surface level without considering the context, without considering the genre, I would think it's easier to come to these kinds of conclusions.
You would never come to those conclusions yourself if somebody had told you that there were the conclusions to come to.
Yeah, that's true.
So the first time I read Revelation, I was after high school, I decided to go to Moody Bible Institute, which of course is a bastion of fundamentalism and a very strong believer in the rapture and the end that's coming soon. And I had read the Bible. I had read the whole New Testament before going to Moody Bible. I knew there was this entrance exam. I was a little nervous about bombing this. So I decided, oh God, I got to read the Book of Revelation because it might be on the exam. I don't want to feel like an idiot. So 2 weeks before I went to Moody, I read Revelation. Oh my God, I have no idea what this is. What in the world is this? I really don't understand this book. And so it wasn't until I got to Moody that I started reading interpretations of the book, especially Hal Lindsey, The Late Great Planet Earth. And once somebody tells you, oh, this means that, and this means that, and this means that, then you say, oh yeah, that makes sense, okay. And then once you get it in your head, it's like that's how you read it. And it's like if you're told that Puff the Magic Dragon is about marijuana, then that's all you hear.
You can't unsee it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
You can't get it out of your head. And but nobody would read the Book of Revelation and come away with the rapture chapter 4, unless they were told that's what it is. Yeah. And the 7-year tribulation, you wouldn't get that out of Revelation. Where do you get 7-year tribulation from? You get it from somewhere else, and you put it into Revelation.
Right. All right. So what about the verses then outside of Revelation that are used to argue for the rapture? Because I feel like those verses are much more convincing than the arguments that are usually made within the book. Because I grew up hearing about, I think it's Matthew 20 something, where Jesus talks about 2 people being in the field and the Son of Man comes and one disappears because he's raptured away, I was told, and then Paul, and I think it's First Thessalonians talking about people floating into the air, right, to meet Jesus when he returns. And on the surface, again, they seem pretty convincing. Right. Like, what else are they possibly talking about? But again, there's context to consider. So maybe for those of us who twitch at the mention of those verses, talk to us a bit about the context of those two passages.
They do. If you don't, if you've got rapture in your head and you read those verses, they're the rapture. That's what you hear.
Has to be.
It's like, and it's like, like yesterday I was teaching one of my classes, and I was saying, I told my students, you cannot read Isaiah 53 and not think of the crucifixion of Jesus. You just can't do it. Yep. But any Jew in the ancient world who read Isaiah 53 never thought it's talking about a Messiah. So it just depends what's in your head, So I'm going to take this verse from Matthew. There'll be, two in bed, one will be taken, one will be left. When the Son of Man comes, and there'll be two women working in the milestone, one will be taken, one will be left. And so, that's the rapture, right? Yeah. Unless you read the context. You actually read that passage. It says that his life happened in the days of Noah. When the flood destroyed everybody was taken away, but only 8 were left. Okay. If one person is taken and one is left, and it's like the days of Noah, the one taken is destroyed. The one who's left is the one who survives.
Right. The one who leaves is in trouble.
You want to be left behind in the next passage. You'll be destroyed by God otherwise. Right. So it's just taking it out of the context. The First Thessalonians passage, it's First Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 through 18, where Paul is writing to the Thessalonians. So again, it's important to understand the context of this thing. This is Paul's first letter, and the letter is being written to Christians in Thessalonica, Christians that he had converted, who are upset because he had told them that Jesus was returning soon, very soon, and that they'd be rewarded at Jesus' return, and they'd be given an eternal kingdom. And so they were eager for that. But time has passed, and some people in the community have died. And they're upset because they're afraid these people have lost out on the benefits of salvation now because they died before it came, and they're friends and neighbors and family and things. And so Paul's writing the letter to tell them that you don't need to be upset about these people who have died, because when Christ returns, the dead in Christ will rise first, and then we who are alive, who are left, will also go up and meet Christ in the air. So we will always be together with the Lord. So, okay, well that sounds like, that's the closest thing you think of. Right. We're going up to meet Jesus. And so the problem is that Paul, in this context, is not talking about Jesus taking people out of the world before a 7-year tribulation. He's talking about when Jesus comes to rule the world. Let me give you an image. So this is part of the importance of the context. The language he uses, sometimes people call this the parousia. I don't know if I can't remember if people in the evangelical circles use that term, but parousia is the term for the second coming of Jesus, the coming of the presence of Jesus. This language of somebody coming and others going out to meet them is the language that was used, and the word parousia was used to refer to what happened when a king would come to visit a city. So a king would be, the Roman emperor or something. The king would come to the city, and the city, knowing the person's coming, would go out and they'd roll out the red carpet, and they'd send the elite of the city out to greet the person and to give them honor and to revere them, and then to bring them back into the city for a celebration. And so what's happening in this account is that the followers of Jesus are going up to meet him to bring him back down, because he's going to rule the earth now. And those who are not on, so the dead are going to go first. So they're going to be privileged. And then we're going to go right behind them. And then the idea is that you're not just like, you're not living in the clouds. You're escorting Jesus back to rule the earth. And those who are not on that side will be destroyed at that moment. That's why you need to be alert and to be ready, because if you're not ready for Jesus, if you're not on Christ's side, you'll be destroyed at his return. the early Christians didn't have an idea of people being taken out of the world. They had the idea that Christ was coming back in judgment. And when he came back in judgment, he was going to wipe out everybody who was opposed to him. And so that's what 1 Thessalonians is talking about. And you can see that just in the context. Because Paul, right after this, he starts talking about you need to be ready or you'll be destroyed. But he's not talking about tribulation, he's talking about Christ annihilating people.
So Paul then is not talking about, he's not painting a picture of like a literal event of people floating up to the sky. He's using terminology.
He might be talking about people floating up in the sky.
Yeah.
but they're floating up the sky not to be removed at a rapture. They're welcoming Jesus down as the King of the earth. And as King of the earth, he's coming to destroy his enemies. And that's for Paul how the kingdom of God comes. As Christ destroys his enemies, and only the righteous are left, and they rule the earth.
So then in the Matthew passage, pedaling back to that one, is this what Jesus is referring to as well? Is he referring to this coming of the Son of Man, like in judgment? Is he referring to the same thing that Paul's talking about?
Well, he's talking. The question is whether. Paul's talking about Jesus coming back.
Right.
Jesus is talking about the Son of Man coming in judgment. And one of the big issues in scholarship is whether, when Jesus talks about the Son of Man coming in judgment, whether he's talking about himself. In the Gospels, the Gospels understand that he is talking about himself. And so in Matthew, this is Jesus' return in power. But the question is whether that's what the historical Jesus thought, which is a separate question.
Got it, because Son of Man is a terminology used like in Daniel, correct?
Yeah, it comes from Daniel chapter 7, where you have these kingdoms that are going to take over the earth one after the other, that are fierce, beast-like, wicked kingdoms, and then after these kingdoms come, one like the Son of Man comes from heaven to wipe them out and to take over the earth. So that's Daniel 7.
Okay. So let's get into a little bit of the weeds of our friend Tim LaHaye, who's the mastermind of the Left Behind series. I mean, we can untangle a few things that I know I was handed growing up, and some of our listeners as well. But all of them are relevant because I think there's a new movie coming out pretty soon on the Left Behind series, so I'm sure you'll be first in line.
Wow, look at those spit arms.
It's it. They're coming out with another one.
Yeah, and so Yeah. It's a little hard to imagine.
The homeless vet are waking up. The homeless vet are waking up underneath the blanket of smile. The cops and the graffiti on the walls. Everyone shoving in the crowd to get ahead, to get the gold. Heaven help me. Heaven help me step forward. I feel it hustle and bustle.
Books from my evangelical days, and there's one called Revelation Unveiled, which is he calls us.
Anybody got a heart? Anybody got a
Revelation, or a lot of the theology he says behind the Left Behind series.
Anybody got a heart?
This one section that I want to
Anybody
read,
got a heart?
For our listeners and have you respond to.
Anybody got a heart?
A chapter on the rapture.
Anybody got a heart? Anybody got a heart?
Pre-tribulation rapture.
Anybody got a heart?
Now there's some names in here, Bart, that I might get wrong, so you can correct me if I.
Anybody got a heart? Like Grover's told God
the
the
for several
pro.
years, a popular argument
Like zombies,
against the rapture
like zombies, they sold the
John
soul.
Darby in the last century, 1828. It was never seen or mentioned by the early Christian fathers for almost 19 centuries of church history. This argument, he said, is simply not true. And then he says, there is an electrifying discovery of a statement in an apocalyptic sermon from the 4th century. The author is designated pseudo and painting. He has a book of some of my old Revelation books from my evangelical days, and there's one called Revelation Unveiled, which is he calls it sort of his commentary on the book of Revelation, where a lot of the theology he says behind the Left Behind series comes from. And he has this one section that I wanted to read for our listeners and have you respond to. It's a chapter on the rapture, and the section is called "Expecting a Pre-Tribulation Rapture is Not New." Now there's some names in here, Bart, that I might get wrong, so you can correct me if I pronounce them wrong, which I probably will. But he says, for several years, a popular argument against the rapture is that it was invented by John Darby in the last century, 1828. It was never seen or mentioned by the early Christian fathers for almost 19 centuries of church history. This argument, he said, is simply not true. And then he says, there is an electrifying discovery of a statement in an apocalyptic sermon from the 4th century. The author is designated pseudo Ephraim, pseudo meaning false, because there is some question as to whether or not it was really written by Ephraim of Nisibis, a prolific Syrian church father. Some prefer a later date for the sermon, called Sermon on the End of the World, suggesting that it may have been written sometime between 565 and 627. For our purpose, the date is immaterial, for even allowing it as late as the 7th century proves that Christians 1100 years
Suck
before
my
the time of
slut!
Darby saw the rapture happening before the tribulation. Then he goes on and he quotes from the sermon. But his main argument is that this Syrian church father apparently... For several years, a popular argument against the rapture is that it was invented by John Darby in the last century, 1528, and was never seen or mentioned by the early Christian fathers for almost 19 centuries of church history. This argument, he said, is simply not true. And then he says, there's an electrifying discovery of a statement in an apocalyptic sermon from the 4th century. The author is designated pseudo-Ephraim, pseudo meaning false, because there is some question as to whether or not it was really written by Ephraim of Nisibis, a prolific Syrian church father. Some prefer a later date for the sermon, called Sermon on the End of the World, suggesting that it may have been written sometime between 565 and 627. For our purpose, the date is immaterial, even allowing it as late as the 7th century proves that Christians 1100 years before the time of Darby saw the rapture happening before the tribulation. Then he goes on and he quotes from the sermon. But his main argument is that this Syrian church father apparently talked about the rapture. So it seems like LaHaye is trying to get into the weeds of history and probably talk about a name that people aren't aware of. But I'm curious, like, how do you respond to this claim that the rapture is not new because it was in the writing of this Syrian church father? Is there any substance to that at all? Does it have any impact on the conversation?
So I would say he's not in the weeds. I'd say what happens is that he sees he sees some weeds from a long distance and thinks that it's a cornfield.
You suck my dick.
I can assure you that he has not read the sermon.
Right.
He's quoting somebody who told somebody about this sermon. Mm-hmm. So Ephraim, you could pronounce him Ephraim. Ephraim was an important church father in Syria. He wrote in Syriac. He was so around the time of when the Council of Nicaea. He was a young man, and he was that period. And he's very orthodox. He wrote a lot of hymns. We have like 500 of his hymns. He's an important figure for scholars of early Christianity. I was on a dissertation committee at Duke some years ago by a student who was doing a dissertation on Ephraim, and really significant and interesting stuff. But it's not the kind of thing that most people would know about or read. And he's correctly pointing out that the sermon that later got attributed to Ephraim was probably not by Ephraim, and it's not in Syriac, but it's a sermon on the what the sermon is it's not very long. It's kind of a riff on this passage in 2 Thessalonians, where in 2 Thessalonians we learn that at the end of time, this Antichrist figure has to go into the temple and declare himself God. And all disasters are going to hit the earth at that time. And so what LaHaye quotes in this book is a little passage from this sermon that he takes completely out of context. And he doesn't know that he takes it out of context because he hasn't read the sermon. So it'd be kind of like, if I'm describing the rapture in my book, which I do, if I describe it and somebody takes my description out of the context and just quotes the description, they could say, so Bart Ehrman believes in the rapture. So here he describes what's going to happen.
Right.
It's like, what?
Right. On page 110, Bart says this, so there it goes. Settles it.
So I actually I looked this thing up this morning. And I knew this was going to be...
I'm coming after that fucking king.
This is not going to be good for Timothy LaHaye, because there's no way that Ephraim believes in the rapture. And so let me just tell you what's happening here. He's describing what happens when the man of sin comes. And this is the man, the Antichrist, who goes into the temple and declares himself God, and all hell's going to break out on earth. And he said, this is what I'll quote it to you. He says, there will be calamity on earth, unlike any that came before us. Fear will fall upon all people. They'll be overcome with terror. Children will renounce their father and follow after the evil one. Priests will abandon their altars to serve as heralds. People will flee to the cemeteries. Okay, so he's talking about because the Antichrist is taking over here on earth and it's going to be horrible. So this is the passage that he's quoting. Ephraim says, people will flee to the cemeteries and they will hide themselves among the dead. So they're going to be hiding behind tombstones and stuff, pronouncing the good fortune of the deceased who had avoided the calamity. Blessed are you, they'll say. Blessed are you who were borne away to the grave, and hence you have escaped from the afflictions. But as for us, woe is us, for when we die, the vultures will serve as escort for us. And it goes on like that. So he's talking about people who, when he says that people have been taken out of the world and avoided the tribulation, he's not talking about the rapture, he's talking about people who died before this thing hit. Announcing the good fortune of the deceased who had avoided the calamity. Blessed are you, they'll say. Blessed are you who were borne away to the grave, and hence you have escaped from the afflictions. But as for us, woe is us, for when we die, the vultures will serve as escort for us. And it goes on like that. So he's talking about people who, when he says that people have been taken out of the world and avoided the tribulation, he's not talking about the rapture, he's talking about people who died before this thing hit. and because lucky them, they don't have to go through this. It is nothing to do with the rapture. But if you take it out of its context, you can make it sound like the rapture, which is what he's done.
Like you said earlier, when you believe in the rapture and you bring that lens with you to a writing like this, you can't help but see the rapture in there, even though it's not there.
You'll find this one all over the internet. Just look it up, and you'll find people from whatever fundamental school or another, using this to say, see, and it was around. And you'll notice that Tim LaHaye doesn't quote anybody else. Like if this was around 1,100 years earlier, why is it in one place? And then when you read it, it's not in that place.
Right.
It was invented by Darby. And so I explained that in my book. In my book, I actually have an explanation of where the idea of the rapture came from, and I put it in its historical context because there were serious stories. There's no doubt. This is something that Darby came up with, and it caused huge furor in his
God damn it.
even among his followers, there's a split in his community because of it.
There was a, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there were a couple beliefs, right? There was a belief that the rapture would happen before the tribulation, there was a belief the rapture would happen after the tribulation, and I think there was maybe like more than one, things like that, right? Like there was a whole bunch of different beliefs about it, is that correct?
Well, so the original belief is, Darby's idea was that there's going to be the rapture before the tribulation, and then other people thought it was going to come after the tribulation. So his view came to be called pre-tribulation rapture, and then the other view came to be called post-tribulation rapture. Then there are some people who start arguing there's a mid-tribulation rapture that happens after 3.5 years, and so those are the three positions staked out, and there still are people, there are still very committed Christians who support one or the other of those views. Yeah. When I was at Moody, I heard Jack Van Impe give a speech. Jack Van Impe is another one of these guys who who spent decades saying that the rapture is going to happen very soon. And so, like, say very soon, and then 20 years later, you write this book and say, now the signs are being fulfilled. 10 years later, right? But now the signs are being fulfilled. But at one point in the speech, he said that he was so much in support of pre-tribulation rapture. So people call that your pre-trib. He said, I am so pre-trib that at breakfast I won't eat post-toasties.
When did like all this start to unravel for you? Because I know, like, obviously you went to Moody, and so there was a season in your life where you were on board with this sort of stuff. But when, and I know, like, you stepped away from the faith, all those different things. Like, when did all of this start to hit you? Like, you start rethinking all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, when I was at Moody, there was a popular
come on, you slut!
bumper sticker among evangelical Christians. that said, in case of rapture, this car will be abandoned. So it's like a bumper sticker. And then a few years later, I saw one that I rather liked. It said, in case of rapture, I want your car. This started falling apart for me when I went to Prince of and started reading the New Testament seriously in Greek and reading the Old Testament in Hebrew, and started studying the Bible from a historical perspective to try to understand it in its own context. And I came to realize that the Hal Lindsey approach, the late great planet Earth, where you can predict what's going to happen in the Middle East leading to this crisis that's going to wipe everything out by 1988, that whole thing was being imposed on the text, and it really wasn't coming out of the text. And we had always learned that you're supposed to do exegesis instead of eisegesis. So exegesis was where you draw the meaning out of the text. Eisegesis is when you put the meaning into the text that you've already got. And I realized, this is just making the text say something. It doesn't actually say that. And once you realize that, then the whole thing kind of falls apart. And so I probably early on, after I stopped being an evangelical, I stopped believing in something like the rapture. But it wasn't that, that of course wasn't related to my leaving the faith. That was just as a Christian, I realized that's just not true.
Yeah. So what is the purpose of this book for modern day people? Because you talked about how earlier you said that John was writing to the writer was writing to his particular group of people going through a particular set of circumstances in their day. But you also say later on in the book, you have a quote, and I think I have it here somewhere. You say, this is a book that continues to be massively significant even if for reasons people might not expect. And so, if the book is not significant in the sense that it's telling us, it's detailing what's going to happen at the end of our time, and that we're going to be raptured away, all these different things, like, if the significance doesn't lie in there, if it's being really written for these early people, what is the significance for us, for you, me, for our listeners today?
Yeah. When I started writing the book, my initial idea was to contrast the evangelical interpretation of Revelation as predicting our immediate future, to contrast that with what historians have long said, that it's not that. That in fact the book of Revelation is describing what the prophet John thinks is going to happen in his own day. And that his enemy is not, the Soviet Union or China, and he's not describing events that are going to transpire because of oil crises in the Middle East. It's not what the book is about. It's actually about the domination of the people of God by Rome, the ancient Rome. And it's about the Roman Empire, and about how John envisions that the Roman Empire is going to be destroyed by God. And you can demonstrate this. And this is not a controversial view among scholars. This is what scholars have long recognized for reasons that I explain in the book. So my book was originally going to be to contrast the kind of fundamentals you guys raised on about the rapture and the tribulation and all that in our future with the historical view, and to show why historians just don't read it as predictions of our future. I thought, well, that would be significant. But the more I thought about it, I thought, and that's about half the book is that. That is half the book, just trying to show that. But then I realized, it's also important to see why this view of things, this view that this is talking about our imminent future, why that is a really dangerous view, and even in ways that it's not particularly dangerous, it's influential. Even among people who don't really know who don't even think that's what Revelation is about. So the second part of my book is about the kind of damage that view has done historically. It's done terrible psychological damage. As you were saying, a lot of your friends were afraid of the rapture as children, and when I was long before your time, but in my time in the 70s, there was a movie out that every evangelical saw about 48 times. It's called Thief in the Night. which is meant to terrify people about being left behind. And just about every evangelical I know who took that movie seriously was terrified because they thought it had happened at one point or another, that they'd been left behind. And so very bad psychological damage for people. But more than that, it's led to a serious violence over the years. I try to show in my book, for example, how the whole disaster at Waco with David Koresh, where the FBI laid siege to the...
Okay, last game. Win, lose, draw, bliss, abandon the board, one refuse, rematch, the internet, go out, the chess site, mess up. Or I just quit.
Understanding of the book of Revelation and his interpretation was predicting their martyrdom. And that whole thing was partly because of that. So there's that kind of thing. But there also, I tried to show after that, I showed that in fact,
dick is getting hard.
No interest in the Bible particularly. They're affected by this view of things. I tried to show, for example, that U.S. foreign policy had been affected by this evangelical interpretation of the end times, especially in terms of American support for the nation of Israel. I don't take a political stand on that, but I do point out how this expectation the end is coming soon has dramatically changed the American foreign policy, including the move of the embassy and to Jerusalem. And I talk about its effect on things like climate change and American policy toward climate change and social policy about climate change. And so a variety of things that actually are affecting all of us, whether we are, whether we're interested in the Bible or committed to the Bible or not. This interpretation of Revelation has very serious effects. And so I tried to lay those out in the book.
So, like, for people who are listening, maybe like pastors or teachers, like, what are ways to steward this book well when you're delivering it to people that you're responsible to teach? Like, because obviously the whole end times thing, like, that's out the window. But if somebody's going to use this book and they're going to teach from it, like, what's a good way to steward this text?
I tell you, I think it's very difficult to use it responsibly, because not just because it's been misinterpreted, but also because when it's rightly interpreted, it's a very disturbing book. Not because it's predicting our future, but because of the view of God and Christ that it presents. And so at the very end of my book, I deal with this issue about whether the God of Revelation is the God that Jesus talked about in the Gospels, and whether the Jesus portrayed in the book of Revelation is the Jesus of the Gospels. Because the Jesus and God of Revelation are all about vengeance and blood and revenge and violence.
It makes perfect sense to me.
The book never says anything about God loving anyone.
As many as I love, I rebuke and chasten, be jealous, therefore, and repent.
I thought that this book was a book of hope for those who are suffering. And I've come to realize it's not a book about hope for the future for most people. It's just the word hope never occurs in the book of Revelation. The love of God never occurs in the book of Revelation. What occurs are words like wrath and vengeance and blood. And it's God's wrath against the planet. And you might think, well, that's God's justice. God is just, and sin, requires punishment, and so this is the punishment. And so I get that. One of the things I talk about in the book is how this is not just destruction of the enemy. This is torture. There are scenes of torture where God tortures people for months without allowing them to die. This, I don't think it's a pleasant view of God. I think it's a very upsetting view of God when you actually allow yourself to see what it's saying, and that it's not, and people say, well, yeah, it's just symbolic. Well, why are you using these symbols to represent God? Why do you want this image of God? Someone who tortures people. Is that the image of God that you want to convey? And so the author of Revelation often considered himself a Christian, but there are lots of people who consider themselves Christian who don't think in very Christian ways or behave in very Christian ways. And I think he would absolutely consider himself a stalwart follower of Christ, but I'm not sure Jesus would consider him to be a follower.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing I talk about at the end of the book.
Sure. All the realities of the violence in the book and the wrath and the torture, things like that. Is that part of the reason why? Because I know Revelation was one of those books that almost didn't make it in to the final cut of the New Testament. Is that one of the reasons why?
So I have a chapter devoted to this about why, about how it got in and the difficulties. The weird thing, I think it's kind of weird, is that the destructive part that we find is so disturbing. What is the part that the church fathers found disturbing?
That's all right.
Most of them kind of like the idea of Rome getting wiped out like this. They were kind of happy with that part. What they didn't like, the thing that, there were two things that caused the problems. One was that people didn't think that the author of Revelation was the same person who wrote the Gospel of John. And it's a little bit ironic because the Gospel of John doesn't claim to be written by somebody named John, but people call it John. The Book of Revelation does claim to be written by somebody named John, but they don't call it John.
Right.
And so it's a little confusing. But so they weren't sure, and they were right. Whoever wrote Revelation did not write the Gospel of John. That's a firm conclusion of modern scholarship. And there were ancient scholars who were arguing. Biblical New Testament Christian scholars said, yeah, this is not the same author. They could show it on stylistic grounds, linguistic grounds. The bigger reason it had trouble is because Revelation celebrates what's going to happen at the end once Christ destroys all of his enemies with a massive flow of blood. And what's going to happen is that the saints are going to inherit the earth, and it's going to be a utopian existence where massive feasting and wealth and power and glory, and so there'll be massive banquets with the Lamb every night. And the church fathers at the time when they were deciding which books would be in the New Testament were leaning much more toward an ascetic lifestyle where you didn't indulge in the pleasures of the flesh. And Revelation looks like it's trying to get these people who are suffering now to a place where they can indulge in the flesh for eternity.
Yeah.
And so the church fathers thought, that's not really, the point is not to starve yourself now so you can feast later. The point is not to be so concerned about your physical state, and you should be concerned about your spiritual state. And this book is just concerned about the physical state. And so they didn't like it for that reason. And it wasn't until church fathers in the 4th and 5th century started saying it's not actually literally talking about feasts and things. Those are just symbols for, in fact, it's going to be a very austere existence. And that it's not talking about that. And that's when it got accepted.
Got it. All right, well, Bart, we are just about out of time, but I could talk to you. I could listen to you all day, talk about this kind of stuff. But thank you for taking the time to join us. Thank you for this book. Thank you for your work.
You're welcome.
That was really good.
Thanks for having me on. It was an interesting book to write, and it's one of the most interesting books to write that I've ever written, I think, because it's just like I got me digging into so much stuff that I really didn't know much about until I wrote it. So,
yeah. Are there any plans that makes you think? Are there any plans of any resources coming out around the book? Like any time I know you do some videos, things like that, some teachings, or anything like that in the works?
There's I've been doing some lectures and things, and some online lectures. I do these online courses off my website, and I'm going to do a lecture on the Rapture actually as a kind of standalone lecture.
Suck my dick, bitch.
In April or something, and so just that kind of thing. I don't know. I don't have anything else in the works other than just kind of that kind of thing, lectures and such.
Awesome. And the last thing, you want to plug your blog real quick?
Yeah. So for those who don't know, I have a blog, Goddammit blog that's gone on for over 10 years now. I blog 5 times a week, every week for over 10 years. Lots of blogs out there, and it's on everything having to do with the New Testament and early Christianity. People have to pay a small fee to join. I don't make a dime from it myself. All the money that comes in goes to charity and
you suck my dick, bitch.
And and the blog it's been growing and growing. I'd like more people to join. It's all word of mouth. Last year we raised over $500,000 last year, over $500,000 for the blog, and it all went to charities. And so, and people can ask me questions about my blog posts. I post on Revelation a lot these days, and I answer every question I get. And so people should think about, look at it. It's just called the Bart. Just look up the Bart in the blog.
Awesome. Well, I'll put the link in the show notes, and we'll be in touch, Bart.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thanks.
I sacrificed my whore. Like a fucking dumbass. That goddamn music. Suck my dick, bitch. Suck my dick, bitch. God fucking damn it. Suck my dick, bitch. No. Suck my dick, bitch. God damn it. God damn it.
This is a sphere. This is a sphere.
Stupid.
And this is a sphere.
Stupid.
And these are all circles. By the end of this video, you will understand why.
Suck my dick.
The theory of Banach spaces has its origins in the early work of a Polish mathematician named Stefan Banach. In his PhD thesis, Banach established the first complete definition of these spaces, and consequently gave birth to an entirely new area of math known as functional analysis. To say that Banach's career path was unconventional is quite the understatement. After graduating from high school, he concluded that there was nothing new to discover in mathematics, so he decided to study engineering at university instead. Years after completing his degree, a chance encounter would change his life forever. One day, Banach and a friend were sitting on a park bench discussing a branch of math they recently learned called measure theory. Just then, Hugo Steinhaus, a prominent mathematician, walked by and overheard the words Lebesgue measure. Overcome by curiosity, Steinhaus immediately introduced himself. They all quickly became friends, and just days later, Banach would solve a math problem that had been plaguing Steinhaus for some time. As Steinhaus wrote in his memoirs, "From then on, we would meet on a regular basis, and we decided to establish a mathematical society." Now in his mid-20s and realizing that there really was much more to be discovered, Banach thrived under Steinhaus's mentorship and lived the life of a research mathematician without any degree in math whatsoever. He would ultimately receive his PhD years later when another professor stapled his many publications together and tricked him into doing a thesis defense.
Right here.
An influential part of this unconventional thesis was the definition of a new mathematical space that leads to weirdly interesting geometries. Geometries where spheres become cubes, circles become squares, and pi equals 4. This weirdness is a result of the various ways that length can be defined in Banach spaces. The technical description is that there are many ways to define a norm on a Banach space. This abstract conception of length turns out to be one of two key features that define Banach spaces in general. So from the mathematician whose career trajectory went completely against established norms, we now turn our attention to his precise notion of a mathematical norm. To get some intuition, let's begin by considering 2 points on the xy plane. We can use the Pythagorean theorem to calculate the distance between them. And in general, we can use this form of it to calculate the distance between any 2 arbitrary points in the plane. But we can also change this setup to get a slightly different notion of distance. Suppose the plane turned into a grid, and you weren't allowed to cut across. So the only way you can move from one point to another is by traveling along the lines of the grid. The distance between 2 points now becomes much simpler. Instead of a squared plus b squared equals c squared, we have a plus b equals c. So in this specific example, the distance between these points is equal to 4. And for any 2 arbitrary points, the general formula for distance will be as follows. Because of its resemblance to the famous Manhattan grid structure in New York, this type of geometry goes by the name of the Manhattan geometry, or the taxicab geometry, while the usual notion of distance we began with is referred to as Euclidean geometry. The taxicab geometry seems innocent enough, but it has some non-intuitive consequences. Recall that a circle is defined as the collection of all points that are the same distance away from the center. Right, so a circle of radius 2 in Euclidean geometry looks exactly as we'd expect. But in taxicab geometry, if we consider all points that are a distance 2 away from the center, we get a much different looking shape. This diamond shape really is a circle with a radius of 2 in this alternative geometry. And even more interestingly, we can calculate a new value of pi. Pi is defined as the circumference of the circle divided by its diameter. The length of each side here is 4, which means the circumference must be 16, and the diameter is 4. So in taxicab geometry, pi equals 4. There is still a third way we can define distance to produce an alternative geometry. Suppose you still had the grid structure of the taxicab geometry, but now the total distance is defined by just taking the maximum distance traversed in either the x direction or the y direction. So in this case, the distance between these points is 4. And the geometry that results from this notion of distance is called the Chebyshev geometry, named after the Russian mathematician Pafnuty Chebyshev. Here, a circle of radius 2 looks like what we typically think of as a square, and pi is equal to 4 once again. So how does all this connect to Banach spaces and norms? Well, all 3 of these spaces are actually Banach spaces, with each having their own unique norm defined on them. Although I've been talking about the general concept of distance between points, a norm is just a special case of distance. Whereas distance is something defined between any 2 points, a norm instead is the length of a vector, which you can view as the distance between the tip of the arrow and its tail. But this applies not just to arrow and space vectors, but to any abstract mathematical vector. So just as we had 3 different rules of defining distance in these spaces, we also have 3 rules for how to define the length of a vector. All of them are mathematically consistent and satisfy the following criteria, which is the precise general definition of a norm. Any space that has some rule specifying what norm is defined on it is called a normed space. So in the hierarchy of mathematical spaces, we can begin with a space that is just a collection of abstract vectors. This naturally is called a vector space. At this stage, there's no way to measure lengths of vectors or angles between them. In order to do so, we define an inner product, which is essentially just a generalized dot product that satisfies these criteria. The vector space now becomes an inner product space. If we are only interested in measuring lengths, however, but not angles, we can define a norm on this space instead. Frequently, the norm of a vector can be defined by first finding the inner product of a vector with itself and then taking the square root. In this case, the norm will logically depend on the inner product. The technical term that's used is that the norm is induced by the inner product. Not all norms are defined in this way though. Some have absolutely no connection to inner products. In fact, there's a convenient theorem that says that the only situation where a norm depends on an inner product is when something called the parallelogram law holds. Consequently, all inner product spaces are normed spaces, but not all normed spaces are inner product spaces. Now, lengths of vectors are just specific ways to measure distances. The more general mathematical notion for distance is called a metric, which is a function satisfying these criteria. And just as an inner product induces a norm induces a metric. But not every metric comes from a norm. So defining a metric on a space leads to a much more general class of spaces called metric spaces. This results in a neat hierarchy of spaces, where each smaller space is a special case of the larger space. So every inner product space is a normed space, and every normed space is a metric space. A Banach space therefore lives in the middle here. It's a normed space with one additional criteria, namely that it's complete. What it means for a space to be complete is that the limit of any converging sequence exists in the space. More precisely, for any Cauchy sequence, if the Cauchy sequence converges to something beyond the space, then the space is incomplete. But if you extend your space so that every Cauchy sequence now converges inside of it, then the space is complete. There are many examples of this, and I explained what all this means in detail in one of my previous videos, which I've linked below. So if you'd like a more comprehensive explanation, then be sure to go check that out. At this stage, I'd like to clarify the precise difference between a Banach space and another important mathematical space, a Hilbert space. While a Banach space is a complete normed space, a Hilbert space is a complete inner product space. This means that a Hilbert space is a Banach space where the parallelogram identity holds. And while any Hilbert space is necessarily a Banach space, there are plenty of Banach spaces that are not Hilbert spaces. To highlight this distinction, we will consider a family of Banach spaces that are directly related to the circles and spheres we saw at the beginning of the video. The LP spaces. The LP spaces are spaces that consist of all sequences where this sum is finite. One space exists for each p-value that's chosen. So for p equals 1, L1 is the space of all sequences where this sum is finite. For p equals 2, L2 consists of all sequences where this sum is finite, and so on. We can define the following norm on all of these spaces to turn them into normed spaces.